dragging two 9-foot long sledges loaded with 757 pounds of supplies and equipment. They had to slog across Antarctica's Ross Island in the pitch black, absolute dead of the polar winter. They were to trek on a terrain where they would barely see the ground at their feet, and all for the unlikely price of three emperor penguin eggs. That sounds exciting. On 27th June 1911, so there were three people, that is Dr. Edward Wilson, next is Epsley Cherry Garrard, and third is Lieutenant Henry Robertson. So here uh, they were to trek on a terrain where they would barely see the ground at their feet, and all for the unlikely price of three emperor penguin eggs. So, here, just for the sake of this price, they had to trek on a terrain where they would barely see the ground at their feet. So, they used to work hard. They used to work hard across Antarctica's Ross Island in the pitch black, absolute dead of the polar winter. So they had to face this in order to gain these penguin eggs. By the time the trio reached the penguin rookery at Cape, rookery means an area where penguins meet, nest and raise their chicks. So by the time the trio reached the penguin rookery at Cape Crozier, Cherry writes that he would have given 5 years of his life for just one night in a warm bed. So they were surviving. So they were living in that winter since long, and they were saying, the Cherry writes that they would have given 5 years for his life for just one night in a warm bed. That means he can sacrifice his 5 years of his life just to sleep, just to spend one night in a warm bed. So they were very much curious to. They were very much. They wanted to stay in a warm bed since that is their long cherished dream now. Dr. Edward Wilson, who instigated this 6-week trip in the depths of the Antarctic winter, later described it as the weirdest bird nesting expedition that has ever been or ever will be. So he said that Dr. Edward Wilson, there were three people, okay? We can also start. First is Dr. Edward Wilson, second is Cherry Garrard, third is Lieutenant Henry Robertson, okay? So here first Cherry writes that he can spend his 5 years of his life just to spend one night in a warm bed, while Dr. Edward Wilson said that when they started this 6-week trip, okay, that expedition that they started, the journey they started was of 6 weeks. Okay, that means 7 6 are okay 42. So he said that this was the weirdest bird nesting expedition that has ever been or ever will be. So you can see the three-person in the picture. Moving on to this journey had its genesis during the discovery expedition of 1901 to 1904, when the first rookery of breeding emperor penguins was discovered at Cape Crozier on Ross Island by a sledging party under Lieutenant Skelton. So here genesis means origin. Okay, this journey had its origin during the discovery expedition of 1901-1904, when the first rookery of breeding emperor penguins. So this is a breed of the penguins which was discovered at Cape Crozier on Ross Island. When discovery, the expedition ship was trapped in the ice for a second year. It gave Skelton the opportunity to be the first biologist to study these astonishing birds. He concluded correctly that the birds laid their eggs in the middle of the Antarctic winter, one of the most astonishing ornithological discoveries. ornithological means relating to birds, the discoveries which are relative to birds. Subsequent visits to the rookery led to wonderful series of observations that were later published. However, at the time it was thought incorrectly that the emperor penguins was one of the planet's most primitive birds, and that analysis of its embryos would reveal links between all birds and their reptile predecessors. Hence, these eggs were particularly scraved by ornithologists. The argument suggested that if only embryos of this primitive bird could be obtained in an early enough stage of development, then surely one would be found with reptilian scales or going through some other dinosauric phase of development. So here they say that the argument that suggested that if only embryos of this primitive bird could be obtained in early enough stage of development, if they find the embryo, if they get the embryos of these primitive bird in an early stage of development, then surely we can find with reptilian skills going through some other dinosauric phase of development. Thus, obtaining the embryo of the emperor penguin was regarded as a major ornithological prize, a scientific equivalent, perhaps, to obtaining the pole itself. Till date, these eggs are one of the most precious ornithological specimens on the planet. So these birds are very interesting. These are birds which we cannot find in general. In order to find them, we have to go to the middle of the Antarctic winter, so that these birds lay eggs. The name of the bird is emperor penguins. Okay, and their breed is very rare. That is why their the embryo of the emperor penguin was regarded as the major ornithological prize. Okay, ornithological means the study relating to birds. So that is why the big prize was allotted to the one who can find out this species of the bird. Scott realized that it would be very dangerous journey, but he knew that Wilson was very keen on making this journey of considerable difficulty for the scientific prize. For him, it was the quest for truth that was important, not worldly success. So, obviously, the one who would find out that these eggs will definitely be very famous and very successful, as the prize is quite huge. He says that the Wilson is not taking keen interest in the worldly success, but he has a thirst for truth. Additionally, they felt that this winter journey would give them an unexpected opportunity for further scientific work, which would answer questions that were of critical importance to the success of the forthcoming pole journey. Firstly, it gave them the opportunity to try out different sledging rations under extreme field conditions. Okay. Okay. Firstly, it gave them the opportunity to try. Okay, here it is. So here, firstly, it gave them the opportunity to try out different sledging rations under extreme conditions, field conditions with varying quantities of fats, etc. And secondly, Scott had requested that his meteorologists deliver predictions for the most likely weather conditions. So for this they needed weather data from the Great Ice Barrier in winter. Thus, the winter journey now became of utmost importance to Scott, and the success of the pole journey as well as being of the greatest scientific interest. So the thing they wanted was of keen interest for the scientific people, It was a great discovery, and it would provide them a wonderful data for their research. So for them it was very important. captain scott started Captain Scott started planning his second expedition aboard Terra Nova. Okay. The ship that was reinforced from bow to stern with 7 feet of oak to protect against the Antarctic ice pack. Captain Scott described Terra Nova as a wonderfully fine ice ship as she pumped the floes with mighty shocks, crushing and grinding a way through some, twisting and turning to avoid others. She seemed like a living thing fighting a great fight. So here floes means large floating areas of ice. So Captain Smith, he was planning his second expedition aboard Terra Nova. So he had a ship, the ship that was reinforced from bow to stern with 7 feet of oak to protect against the Antarctic ice pack. Captain Scott described Terra Nova. So Terra Nova is the name of the ship, which is also which is also described as a wonderfully fine ice ship. She can bump the floes with mighty shocks, means floating areas of ice. She could crush, grind away through some, twist and turn to avoid others. So it was considered, it seemed like when the ship was sailing, it seemed like a living a thing fighting a great fight. Wilson, the trip's zoologist, accompanied them as the chief of scientific staff to an expedition that was intended to be a biological triumph. For Wilson, the chance to continue studying the breeding biology of the birds was an irresistible temptation. Hence, to Scott and Wilson, reaching the South Pole was considered to be a mere items in the results of an expedition scientific program. Now the emperor penguin lays its eggs in June. So the emperor penguin used to lay eggs in June in the Antarctic midwinter. Hence the decision to make the 70-mile trip from Scott's base camp on Ross Island to the penguin colony at Camp Crozier during the worst possible weather was made. So it was decided to try to situate the main expedition base at Cape Crozier itself, which gave the opportunity to study both the Adelie penguins and the emperor penguins at close quarters, as well as providing a year-round source of fresh meat and eggs. So here will end up today's class. So here it is an interesting story how they had this destination, how they made up their mind to go through this to find out this, to discover these emperor birds eggs, and also they wanted to do research on them, so in order to find the reptilian scales. Okay, and they can also discover the dinosauric phase of development. So for that they made this attempt in the worst of the climate. They had to their main expedition was at Cape Crozier itself. Okay, so they wanted Adelie penguins and the emperor's penguins. They wanted to study both of them at close quarters, so they can provide them a year-round source of fresh and meat and eggs. So here we'll wind up today's class. Um, I hope you understood the story. You can reread the story in order to understand in a better way, and we'll continue the rest of the lesson in our next live session.